Today, we're putting the Malaysian semiconductor sector under the microscope. You know, a lot of people, even seasoned investors, make this massive fundamental mistake. They take all the tech and semiconductor companies in this region and just toss them into one giant identical bucket. But as we're going to see in the data today, that approach is literally miles away from the truth. So let's kick things off with a pretty crucial question. Are all these semiconductor companies actually playing the same game? The short answer? Absolutely not. No way. Today we're doing a head-to-head comparison of two major players, SkyeChip and KeyASIC. Now sure, they both operate in the broader tech space, but they live in entirely different universes within the semiconductor world.
Section 1. Core business models. Two companies, totally different DNA.
When you actually look at their fundamental identities, the contrast is stark. On one side of the ring, you've got SkyeChip. They're a fabulous IC design and IP licensing company. Honestly, you can kind of think of them as the arm of Malaysia. They are building this super complex, high-end silicon intellectual property. We're talking memory interfaces, custom ASICs, the really deep tech. Then on the other side, you've got KeyASIC. They operate as an end-to-end IoT or Internet of Things solutions company. They're basically a hybrid integrator. They're doing chip design, sure, but also modules, cloud software, the whole shebang. They aren't just selling the core IP, they're entirely focused on the applied, real-world product lifecycle. And this right here perfectly illustrates SkyeChip's high-value asset-light model. Look at this focus. It's strictly on silicon IP design and product development. They don't own massive manufacturing plants. Actually, scratch that, they don't manufacture at all. Instead, they go all in on that deep intellectual property layer, serving big global fabless IC companies with standard and custom silicon IPs. It's highly specialized.
Moving on to Section 2. Position in the semiconductor value chain.
Okay, mapping out the value chain really makes this story crystal clear. Down at the very foundation, that high-value IP and architecture layer, SkyeChip is an absolute powerhouse, right? Meanwhile, KeyASIC's footprint there is pretty limited. Step up one level to advanced chip design, and SkyeChip is, again, heavily involved, while KeyASIC is more moderate. Now, here's the funny thing. Neither of them actually manufactures chips. They're both completely fabless, but look at the end products and IoT layer. Here, the tables completely turn. SkyeChip doesn't play in this consumer-facing arena at all. Zero. KeyASIC, though, they lean incredibly hard into this application layer, so they're essentially operating at total opposite ends of the tech spectrum. Which brings us to Section 3, growth profiles and financials. So the most crucial thing to look at here is this massive number, 44.6%. That is SkyeChip's explosive compound annual growth rate in revenue from fiscal year 23 to 25. That growth skyrocketed them from roughly 57 million to almost 120 million ringgit. And that's heavily driven by a really impressive 130 million ringgit order book. Plus, because they're playing in that ultra-lucrative IP layer we just talked about, they're pulling in strong profit margins sitting right around 30%. Conversely, when we look at the financial data from KeyAIC's February 2026 quarter, it's just a completely different reality. For this specific period, they reported a net loss of approximately 3.28 million ringgit. And, this really reflects the inherently tough nature of trying to scale an end-to-end IoT integration model. It's just a lot heavier and trickier to scale compared to the high-margin, asset-light IP licensing games SkyeChip is playing. But hey, explosive growth and profit margins are really only half the story, right? We have to look at the risks. For SkyeChip, high reward means high risk. Their revenue is largely non-recurring, so they literally have to constantly hunt down new, massive projects just to keep that growth engine running. Also, and this is huge, their prospectus shows over 90% of their revenue is concentrated in the China and Taiwan markets. That's a ton of exposure to geopolitical shifts and potential export controls. Now, KeyASIC faces a totally different beast. They do have the potential for solid recurring revenue from their IoT platforms, which is great, but their main risk is just a much slower growth trajectory and a heavy reliance on smaller-scale contracts, like, for example, a recent 13 million ringgit AI deal. So it's the classic trade-off, explosive, concentrated growth versus slower, systemic scaling. And that brings us to the core takeaway of this explainer. By decoding their DNA, you can see exactly why grouping SkyeChip and KeyASIC together is just a bad idea. They represent two wildly different strategies in the semiconductor ecosystem. So I want to leave you with this provocative thought. As the global hunger for silicon just continues to accelerate, which layer of the tech ecosystem do you think will truly dominate this next decade of the AI and IoT boom? Is it going to be the deep foundational IP design from the likes of SkyeChip, or the integrated end-to-end applications championed by KeyASIC? Thanks so much for joining me to decode the data today and keep learning.